I started my night shift at 10 p.m, the same way I always did, sign the logbook, clip my radio to my vest, and pretend the size of the place didn't bother me. During the day, the warehouse felt like a machine that never stopped breathing. Forklifts beeped, conveyor belts whined, people shouted over each other, and the air had this constant hum, like electricity was alive in the walls. But at night, after everyone went home, it turned into something else. A giant concrete box with too much empty space and not enough sound. The building was huge, high ceilings, long aisles of pallet racks, loading bays that could swallow a truck whole, the kind of place where your footsteps don't just echo, they come back at you like the building is copying you. The lighting didn't help. Most of it was fluorescent and some of the tubes were old. They buzzed. A few flickered like they were trying to decide whether they wanted to stay on. The worst part was when you'd walk under one and it would pop a little like a small static snap, and your brain would jump even though you knew exactly what it was. Technically, I wasn't completely alone. There was another guard on duty, but he stayed in the front gate booth, watching the entry cameras and signing trucks in and out when deliveries came early. My job was to patrol inside, check the doors, spot anything out of place, keep an eye on the alarm panels and do timed rounds so the company could prove someone was walking the property. Most nights were boring, which sounds nice until you've spent 4 hours listening to your own breathing and the distant groan of a building settling. I did my first round around 10:30. Everything was normal. Bay doors locked, emergency exits sealed, motion sensors steady. The air smelled like oil, cardboard and cold metal. My coffee was still hot in my thermos, and I remember thinking, okay, easy night. By 12:30 a.m, the warehouse was at peak night shift quiet. Even the highway noise outside sounded far away. I started my second full patrol, following the same route I always did. Main aisle, loading bays, back corridors, then the emergency exit hallway before circling back to the control room. That's when I saw it. The back emergency exit door, door E7, was cracked open, not wide, just a couple inches. Enough to let in a line of darker darkness, if that makes sense, and a narrow strip of cold air. I stopped so fast my boots squeaked on the concrete. That door was never supposed to be open. It had a hydraulic closer that pulled it shut. It had a metal security bar. It had an alarm sensor. During the day, employees weren't even allowed to use it unless there was an actual emergency. At night, it was supposed to be sealed, period. But there it was, open. The first thing I noticed wasn't the door itself. It was the smell. Outside, air had a different scent, damp dirt and wet leaves, and it was leaking into that hallway like someone had poured it in. I stepped closer and saw a strip of red security tape hanging loose, torn like it had been peeled back and then yanked. My heart started doing that annoying thing where it beats faster even when you're trying to be calm. I raised my radio. "Gate, this is inside," I said. "Emergency exit E7 is open. Did you see anything on camera?" The other guard, Malik, answered after a second. "Negative. No movement on that camera." "Door alarms?" "That's the problem," I said. "No alarm. It's just open." There was a pause on the line. "Could be the sensor," he said. "Or maintenance screwed up the tape." "Maybe," I said, even though I didn't believe it. A door like that doesn't crack open on its own. I kept my body angled so I wasn't standing directly in front of the opening. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it through the gap. Outside was pitch black. Loading yard, chain link fence, stacks of pallets near the dumpsters. The beam caught wet pavement and a few puddles. Nothing moved. No headlights. No silhouettes. But I still had the feeling someone was there, just out of range of the light. I didn't push the door open. If it swung wider, I'd be the one stepping outside into the dark, and I didn't like that idea. Not alone, not when the camera had no movement and the alarm hadn't triggered. I started to back away to call Malik again, and that's when I heard a sound from inside the warehouse. A small metallic clink, like something thin hitting concrete or tapping a rack. Then, a drag, soft and steady, like a box being slid across the floor, too controlled to be a falling object, too heavy to be a rat. My whole body tightened. That wasn't the building settling. That wasn't the HVAC. That wasn't distant traffic. That was movement. I pressed the radio button again. Malik, I just heard something inside near receiving. Call police. Now. I'm going to check it. It was a stupid thing to say out loud. I'm going to check it. Like I was the hero in a movie. I wasn't. I just didn't want to leave the inside of the building unsecured if someone was already in there. Plus, if I ran to the front and locked myself in and someone stole thousands of dollars in equipment, I'd be the one answering questions in the morning. So I moved. The hallway opened into the main warehouse floor, and the moment I stepped out, the space swallowed sound. My footsteps echoed off the racks and came back delayed. The flashlight beam cut through rows of pallet shelving like a tunnel. Dust floated in it, drifting slowly like snow. Some of the overhead fluorescents were flickering, not full strobe, just enough to make shadows feel like they were shifting. Every time one dimmed, my brain tried to fill in the dark with shapes. I walked toward receiving, the area where pallets came in, where boxes were staged, where a person could hide behind a wall of shrink-wrapped loads and you'd never see them unless they wanted you to. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach knot even tighter. A pallet was out of place. It wasn't a big dramatic mess. It was subtle. A loaded pallet that should have been squared off next to the others was sitting at an angle, as if someone had shoved it quickly to make space. And on the floor beside it was a strip of torn plastic wrap, still kind of curled like it had been ripped in a hurry. I stopped and listened. For a few seconds there was nothing, just the far-off buzz of lights and the faint hum of my own blood in my ears. Then I heard it, low voices, not loud enough to make out words, just that rushed, tight kind of whispering that people do when they're trying not to be heard. Like two people arguing quietly or coordinating. Two people. That thought hit me hard, because I could handle the idea of one dumb trespasser. Two meant teamwork, a lookout, a plan, a car outside, a weapon maybe, and I was standing in the middle of a concrete field with nowhere to hide that also wasn't a trap. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, aiming between the racks. For a second, the beam found nothing. Then a shape moved, fast. A shadow pulled back behind a row of pallets, too quick for me to see a face. But it was unmistakably human. The movement wasn't an animal. It wasn't a trick of the light. Someone had been there, and they didn't want to be seen. My mouth went dry instantly. I didn't yell. I didn't announce myself. Yelling would just tell them exactly where I was. Instead, I did the only thing that made sense. I backed up and headed for the control room. The control room was a glass-walled office near the center of the warehouse floor, raised slightly with monitors for the interior cameras. It wasn't a fortress, more like a fish tank, but it had a solid door that locked from the inside, and that was enough for my brain to treat it like safety. I turned and moved fast. The echo of my own footsteps was brutal. Every step was like I was shouting, "I'm here," into a megaphone. I tried to walk quietly, but panic doesn't do quiet. As I passed the racks, I heard something behind me, another metallic rattle, like a shelf being bumped. I couldn't tell if it was them following or my imagination, but the feeling was the same. They're closer than you think. I reached the control room and yanked the door open. I stepped inside, slammed it shut and locked it. The lock clicked, and that sound was the first time all night I felt even a fraction of relief. Inside, the lighting was brighter, too bright. The monitors on the wall were arranged in a grid, different angles of aisles, loading bays, exits. My hands were shaking as I switched camera views, trying to find the receiving area. I found it. 2 figures in hoodies. They weren't rushing. That was the scariest part. They moved like they knew they had time. One was holding a small box, something that looked like inventory, maybe electronics, maybe tools. The other kept looking over his shoulder, scanning. Then one of them stopped. He tilted his head slightly, like he heard something, and then he looked directly up at the camera. It felt like he was looking at me through the screen. My skin prickled all over. I stepped back instinctively, even though I knew he couldn't see me from there, unless he also knew where the control room was. Malik's voice came through the radio. "Police are on their way. 5 minutes." 5 minutes. In that moment, 5 minutes sounded impossible, because I was in a glass office with a locked door and 2 people loose in the building. I pulled my phone out and held it in my hand, ready to call again if I had to. I dragged a chair toward the door, not because I thought it would really stop anyone, but because doing nothing felt worse. Then I heard footsteps on the warehouse floor. Close. Not echoes from far away. Close enough that it sounded like someone was right outside the control room. Slow. Controlled. Like they weren't running. Like they weren't panicking. They knew exactly where they were going. I held my breath. My eyes flicked between the door and the monitor. On the screen, I could still see one of the intruders near receiving, but the other one was gone. My throat tightened. The missing one had to be the one walking near me. The footsteps stopped right outside the control room door. Silence. Then the door handle moved, just a little, like someone testing it without committing. The lock held. The handle moved again, harder. Then a pause. I heard a sound that made my stomach drop. A light tap on the glass wall beside the door. Not a knock, more like someone tapping to see how thick it was. Then, very softly, another tap. My hands were shaking violently now. I stayed back from the glass, keeping my body out of view as much as possible. I didn't know if they could see through the reflection or if the glare from inside made it impossible. I didn't want to find out. On the monitor, the intruder who remained near receiving looked up again, like he was listening for something. Then he shifted, putting himself behind a stack of pallets, like he was waiting. The door handle twisted once more. The lock clicked but didn't give. I heard a quiet exhale from the other side, an annoyed sound like someone disappointed. Then the footsteps moved away. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. A minute later I heard it again. Metallic clatter, then a distant heavy bang, like a door being pushed somewhere else. Maybe they were heading back to the emergency exit. Maybe they were trying another way out. Maybe they were deciding if it was worth coming back to the control room with something heavier. And then, finally, sirens. Even muffled through warehouse walls, that sound was like oxygen flooding my lungs. On the monitors, both figures snapped into quick motion. No more calm scanning. They ran. One headed toward the back exit corridor, the other followed a second later. In the loading yard camera, I caught a brief glimpse of them slipping through the cracked door and disappearing into the darkness beyond the fence line. By the time officers entered through the front, the warehouse was empty again, empty in the worst way, like it had been disturbed and then forced to act normal. They swept the aisles, checked the perimeter, and found what I'd already suspected. The emergency exit sensor wiring had been tampered with. Not broken by accident, tampered with. Someone knew how to keep the alarm from triggering. They didn't catch them that night. The company added extra locks after that, upgraded sensors, increased staffing, all the usual fixes. But none of those changes touched the part that stayed with me. It was the way that door handle moved, slow, careful, like the person on the other side wasn't scared at all, like he had expected it to open, and the fact that he knew where the control room was. I worked night security for a while after that, but the warehouse never felt like just a building again. At night, it felt like a place that could hide people too easily, a place where sound lies to you, where shadows move when nothing moves, and where, in the middle of a shift that's supposed to be quiet, a single door left open can turn the entire night into a hunt.